Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the second webinar on what we're terming WIOA Wednesdays. This one is focusing on adult education and literacy activities and services that are defined under WIOA. So we're going to go through and maybe touch a little bit on what was covered last week with Mike's integrated education and training, because that is one of the activities and services under WIOA. But we're not going to hopefully duplicate too much, and we'll definitely get through what we need to. The reason why this is important is because these are the activities that are going to be determined and identified in the competitive application, and through which grant funds will be made available on a multi-year basis to eligible providers to develop, implement, and improve adult education and literacy activities within the state. So it's kind of important to know, well, what are those activities that were intended to develop and implement? And we've got a couple polling questions here that I want to just get a baseline information here on what those allowable activities are. So I launched the first poll, and this is asking under WIOA, how many adult education and literacy activities are allowable? You have your choices there. Can everyone see the poll?
No.
I'm getting some responses, so. I'm getting a few responses. I'm getting a few responses saying that they don't see the poll. You're going to have to make sure that you've got the latest Zoom version that you're using, that you'll be able to see these things. Very good. Thank you for the suggestion. It was a pop-up window, so if you are in full screen, you might not see it. So reduce your screen, and you should be able to see the smaller poll window. I'm going to close the poll for now. We only had 3 participants, so hopefully with some of the other questions, we're going to see a little bit better response. If you could answer, the correct answer is 8. So under WIOA, there are 8 activities that that are allowable for adult education and literacy services. Second question is I'm asking, well, how many activities were allowable under WIA? And again, hopefully you can check your browser. Mike's just going ahead and responding in the group chat. That's fine too. I got the 3 respondents that apparently can see the poll results, and though those indicated 6, Mike indicated 5, and the correct answer is 4. So there are 4 activities under WIA that were allowable for adult education and literacy. Last pre-test question. And go ahead and respond in the group chat if you'd like. Of the activities allowable under WIA, how many remain unchanged in WIOA? So now in WIOA, we have 8 activities. We had 4 before. Of those 4, how many remain the same? We got an additional voter this time. Okay, I'm sharing the results, and the correct answer is 1. Um, so just with this information, I think that we can already determine that there has been a lot of changes, a lot of new things that we need to be aware of. So I'm going to close out of the poll, and let's go back to the next screen highlights. So everything that's in green and above the top line there are those 4 original that were part of WIOA for adult education and literacy activities. Adult education, workplace activities, and family literacy activities, and literacy were all part of WIA. What has been added, what is new under WIOA, is English language acquisition, workforce preparation activities, integrated English literacy and civics education, and integrated education and training. So the only one that stayed the same of the original 4 was literacy. The definition for that stayed the same, unchanged, didn't really change. But with the ones highlighted in green, we see some language, some changes in there. We're going to go through each one of these definitions. Obviously, we're not going to spend as much time on the ones in green or in literacy. More of the time is going to be spent in what's new under WIOA. Okay. So, adult education, changes there. We really are focusing on the ability to improve below post-secondary level an individual's ability to read, write, speak, do mathematics, and everything necessary in order to achieve a secondary school diploma. Transition to post-secondary education and obtain employment. So not a lot has changed there, but I think that this aligns with the performance outcome measures under WIOA. That transition piece, that obtaining employment piece, while there in WIA, is just being reinforced in WIOA much more. And you see that in the definitions. Family literacy activities. This is the one area where an individual doesn't need to qualify for, if you will, for adult education services on their own. They can qualify because of their a parent or family member who wants to improve their literacy skills for the benefit of their children. So it's an excellent opportunity for those that might be above those testing range, but still need skills. It's an activity there that, although not heavily funded or supported through the performance outcomes, is still an allowable activity under WIOA. Literacy, the one area that wasn't changed, is still an allowable activity, still defined the same way as WIA. Then we get into workplace. These are the services that we're going to the employer, and with the employer's aid, we're developing courses that are supportive of the needs of the employees, the individuals that lack skills. You're either providing that at the workplace or an off-site location, but you're working on their adult education needs. Okay. Now we're getting into the to the area here that is indicated in red. It's a new area. So it's English language acquisition. Really shouldn't seem new because improving English language skills has always been part of adult education. But there are some elements within this that makes it new. We have some discrepancy between the definition here and the purpose that has been defined under Title II, in that this definition is focusing on competency in reading, writing, speaking, and comprehension of the English language, whereas the purpose includes language that talks about mathematical skills. I think that it's important to realize that that skill is still necessary because of and leading to Part B of English language acquisition, in that this course needs to lead to the attainment of a secondary school diploma and transition to post-secondary education or employment. So there's an opportunity here that the course includes mathematical skills, includes the skills necessary to be successful in those transitions and in employment. We need to keep in mind that English language acquisition and the participants thereof should not be limited to those who might not be seeking a secondary school diploma or transition. We should not discourage or exclude from eligibility and participating in the courses if that is not their primary goal. But the reason and the way that we can make sure that the course leads to this is given to us in three options. We make sure that a provider leads to these outcomes by the use of local curriculum and lesson plans that's aligned to CCRS and 21st century skills. So by using your curriculum and your lesson plans that's aligned to that, you're helping to lead an individual to those outcomes of employment and transitioning to post-secondary. Option 2 includes offering counseling services to assist in that transition. Access to that counseling service is the key element there. Whether or not they take advantage of it is another element. I like to think that most best practices would be a combination of some of these options. The third option being that the ELA course itself is part of a career pathway. So any one, or like I mentioned, best practice might be a combination of these options, would be fulfilling the requirement of leading to achieving a high school equivalency, transitioning to further training or employment. Okay. Integrated English literacy and civics education. These are the services that are provided under adult education and literacy activities. These are services for English language learners, including those who are professionals with degrees, to acquire basic and more advanced skills needed to function effectively as citizens, as workers, as parents in the United States. It includes the use of and inclusion of English language acquisition, so what we just talked about, and instruction on the rights and responsibility of citizenship and civic participation, and may include workforce training. Now, integrated English literacy and civics education services is definitely different than the program side of it. So this graph helps to maybe show a little bit about what those service components are. So we're combining the literacy, we're combining English language acquisition, and we're combining civics education. And we may include workforce training. Now, a person might not be the best fit for this type of service. You need to look at whether or not they're better served in English language acquisition, or if they're better served in adult education or literacy to meet that particular needs of the English language learner, to match the services available to student needs. Before we go any further, and this is moving into the third area that's new under WIOA, it's important to realize that not all of the services and activities that we are outlining here, all 8 of them, are required for each and every provider to offer. Each of the activities are selected based upon the needs of the region, based upon the needs of the service provider, their capacity, their ability to provide these activities. So when you're looking at which activities you select to offer or to provide in your region, you're looking at, well, what are the requirements of these activities? And then more importantly, what are the needs of my area and my region, so that you're aligning those services and activities with the needs of your area. As we move into workforce preparation activities, I've made sure that we've included which sections are helpful for further defining and pulling that information out. It's nice to see this activity added as a adult education literacy activity. I think that it's an area where we struggled in making these services available, but it was very much a gray area. Now to have workforce preparation spelled out that yes, it does come under the purview of Title II, it is an activity, but it might not be Title II that's providing it. There are partnerships that are able to perhaps do the workforce preparation activities in the area. But having this defined, that it's the combination of basic academic skills, critical thinking skills, those employability skills that we talk about with the 21st century skills, utilizing workforce, digital literacy, and I believe that Mike provided that definition of digital literacy last week. It's those activities that that we look at, making sure that we include as we do this activity. Okay, this is again an area that we talked briefly. We talked last week about integrated education and training. It's such a new player on the block that I've included a couple slides on here, not to be redundant in any way. It's a combination of adult education and literacy activities concurrently and contextually with workforce preparation activities, which we just talked about, and workforce training, specific to an occupation or occupational cluster, and for the purpose of educational and career advancement. Already talked and mentioned that it's not a requirement that all eligible providers and all participants be engaged in each one of these activities or be enrolled in each one of these activities. Section 2032 of the Act lists all of the activities and services that are allowable under adult education and literacy activities, and that's what we're doing today. We're going through all 8 of those allowable ones. It's only the activity, this is only one activity of several that are listed. We continually have participants who come into the program that might not be ready for or indeed in need of integrated education and training. Some, depending on local economic conditions, may be best served first or only through other services. Perhaps their goal is only to achieve a high school equivalency diploma. To again illustrate and break out the different components within IET, there's a simple visual, and then the descriptors there of adult education and literacy activities, which we described in the first activity, workforce preparation activities, the previous one, and then this new one that is important to go into a little bit more detail on, the workforce training for a specific occupation or cluster, and it's defined in section 134. What sets this apart as needing are those unique descriptors in there concurrently and contextually. So it to meet that requirement for concurrently and contextually, IET program, each one of those activities, of the 3 activities, must be of sufficient intensity and quality. Um, they must occur simultaneously. It's not sequencing it so that, well, first you do adult education, then you do workforce preparation, and then you do. It's making sure that within the course and the syllabus of the course, that all three of these activities are equally, concurrently included as part of that delivery. That you're using occupational and relevant instructional materials, that you're not creating just a gen ed type course, but you're actually working on a workforce training that is relevant to your regional needs for economic development, for job possibilities, that it's relevant to a specific sector, if you will. So within that, we're looking to make sure that within IET, that there's a single set of learning objectives. And this is where it gets tricky. And even in discussions at the state directors meeting, IBEST, Washington State, brought this up, that oftentimes, even in their programs, they have, well, these are the objectives for the adult education, these are the objectives for workforce, and these are the objectives for the welding class. And they just stack those objectives on top of one another and say, okay, this is the breakout of the course. It's taking it to another level of integrating those objectives into one type objectives where they're a little bit less distinct between the activities. We talked about the need that this not occur sequentially, but that it be simultaneous, that there's some specific adult education content. Again, tying it and anchoring it with the college and career readiness standards, taking the workforce training competencies and anchoring it to 21st century skills, and making sure that they function cooperatively. So, talked briefly about substituting general employability instructional materials. While this would be possible, it certainly is not within the statutory requirements. So it's not meeting the vision, the spirit of WIOA. There is one other element with IET, not only as we talked about concurrent and contextually, it talked about for the purpose of educational and career advancement. And there's two ways that, that a program can construct an IET course that meets that. And that's by either making sure that the course is aligned with the state's content standards, which we just talked about being aligned with CCRS and 21st employability skills. And the other way is by making sure that it's part of a career pathway. We really see the integrated education training being a powerful tool, a system, if you will, of adult education contributing towards career pathway development. Okay, we're going to do a couple more polls, and certainly add your comments to the chat. Let me see, just to make sure that I haven't lost or and then we're going to have time for questions. Okay, can everyone see the post test? So the first post-test question, for those that can't see it, is a true or false. An eligible provider is required to provide all adult education and literacy activities. Second question was adult education and literacy activities provided in an area by an eligible provider can be based on need, prior experience, capacity, level of alignment with partners, or state required. The answer to that first one about an eligible provider being required to provide all adult education and literacy activities is false. An eligible provider purposely selects which activities best align to the needs of the region, to the needs of those that they're serving. And from the 8 activities that are allowable, they select those, and they'll be able to select that in the competition, which activities that they choose to engage in for their area. So for adults, the second post-test question in this group was activities provided in an area by an eligible provider can be based on, and it was a little bit tricky, and you could select multiple answers there. It is most predominantly based on need, also based upon prior experience. So if an eligible provider is experienced in doing IEP type courses, then they probably would continue to select that as one of their activities in the competition to do that. Capacity, certainly an eligible provider needs to look at what staffing, what physical facilities do they have, what capacity do they have to be able to offer these activities, and make a selection based on that. Level of alignment with partners is certainly a decision point as well. With your alignment with providers, you might have them doing the workforce preparation activities, therefore freeing you up and funds for other activities, and you would not select that as one of the activities that you're providing in your area. State required? Not necessarily. The state's not going to come in and say that you have to provide these activities. There is flexibility for each of the areas, and looking at their needs and their ability to grow and what their participant population is. Those are more decisions. The state will certainly incentivize and look at ways that we're providing services, but the state won't require certain activities from an area. Okay, I've got 3 more post-testing questions, and then we can certainly move to Q&A. I had some examples and some homework that we can follow up with as well. When ensuring that ELA activities, English language acquisition activity, leads to attainment of a high set and transition to other training or employment, an eligible provider has flexibility in providing options. True or false? So the answer to that one is true. You have 3 options enabled to, but you can also do any combination of those 3 or do them in tandem. So one of those options is making sure that you're aligned to the college and career readiness standards. making sure that there's access to career counseling. And does anyone remember the third one? It's related to a career pathway. Okay, the second question in this post-test is the difference between IELCE, Integrated Education Literacy Civics Education Services, and Integrated Education Literacy Civics Program, Section 243 is, and then you have multiple choices that you can choose from. One being the grant funds, two being the inclusion of workforce training, three being the inclusion of civics education, and fourth being nothing. Question was the difference between Integrated Education Literacy Civics Education Services, so IELCE services, and IELCE program, just Section 243, and Marcella's going to do a webinar on that, is the grant funds, the inclusion of workforce training, the inclusion of civics education, or nothing. Keeping in mind that this is a section, and you'll have access to this PowerPoint, is that this is one where it said and may include. So the answer to this is two of the options, being either the grant funds. IELCE services is coming out 231 funds, and IELCE program is coming out 243. And the inclusion of workforce training being that it's an option. It may be included or it may not be included. Okay, one last question in the poll, and then we'll turn it over to your questions and an example and some homework. Each element of IET must be offered. And then we list a couple options: concurrent and contextually, of sufficient intensity and duration, for educational and career advancement, using occupational relevant material, or all of the above. The answer to that is all of the above. Very good. That's great. So you can see that there's a lot of elements required in IET, hence why there was a separate webinar on it last week, and why I even took the liberty of touching base on it as well. The example that I included in here is on integrated education and training, and it comes from CLASP, and what the hyperlink there will take you to be a 6-page document that CLASP published on the importance of and the elements of integrated education and training. And then they proceed to break out a couple different examples of how this can be and is being in place in different areas within nationally. But I wanted to bring your attention to some of this that you might already be practicing. One of those areas is what has typically been called bridge programs, all-we type or IBEST models. And I know that there's programs out there that are using this, have used this, and they've created a set of objectives with that. But again, it's finding ways to make this into a single set of objectives. So it's taking it perhaps to that next level of where before these were chunked out into maybe separate things, and maybe they didn't include all of these things. Maybe we offered a pre-CNA course that only offered adult education and literacy activities to work on vocabulary, but we might not have included as purposefully a workforce preparation activity. And even if we didn't offer it ourselves, it wasn't in partnership with Title I, and it wasn't of sufficient intensity and duration, and again, falling underneath that single set of objectives for the course. So it's important and purposeful that we look at how integrated education and training programs are designed and how they are built and created so that they have these three components, but they become not just stackable, but they become integrated and offered concurrently and contextually. So the homework assignment was really some questions to take back and to think about, to look at, well, what kind of, based on this information, what does a region or local plan identify as being needed activities? Is there a clear definition within the region or an understanding of, hey, we have a great need for IEP services, or we have a great need for workforce preparation? What are those activities that you would consider of the 8 as being highest priority in your region, in your area to provide? Are there current examples of AEO practices that can be innovated to meet those required new needs under the new activities that we've talked about today? Those 4 new activities, are there things that you're currently doing that with the information that you have now of, well, if I align it to the CCRS and if I provide career counseling, I'm meeting the requirements now of that activity, and I can do that. I appreciate the doodle. What steps are being done locally to promote concurrent enrollment with training programs and co-enrollment with Title I? So what kind of relationships do you have with training programs that you might be able to connect participants with to be able to build out integrated education and training programs? What type of co-enrollment do you have with Title I that you can go in and that you can say, well, look, if we can partner for these services, then that's more services that I can offer in different activities and areas of activities. And then the last question was just thrown out there about what types of technical assistance would be beneficial in ensuring that activities are allowable, that you're able to look at this and say, okay, am I meeting the, not just the letter, but the spirit of WIOA? Am I meeting the requirements that are defined under WIOA? Are these course offerings sufficient to be considered an allowable activity? What type of technical assistance would be beneficial for your area, for your region, for your local program as you look at transitioning to WIOA, transitioning to these activities? Okay. Going to unmute. I think that you should have that capability yourselves. to open it up for questions. We can go back and review any slide that we covered, any activity that that you might have further questions about, or would you like to go into a little bit more detail? Made sure that we had about 15 minutes to be able to go through that. But again, it was really a opportunity to say, okay, we're moving from 4 WIA activities to 8 WIOA activities. What are they and how are they defined? So if I asked you to define one of these 8 activities, you would feel comfortable doing that? Can't imagine I did that good of a job of explaining this.
Alex, this is Sarah Rissler. Could you give us an example of a family literacy activity that you have seen?
Okay, family literacy activities. I think that Hawkeye is still one of the only programs that is using or has additional funds so that they're engaging in a family literacy activity. So they're able to pull in and do reading clubs that are centered on improving the literacy to improve the, the collaboration between parent and child to make sure that they're able to read. It's an interactive. I've seen family literacy activities where both the parent and child were there at the same time, and it was more of a reading circle type activity. Does that help give an example of?
Yeah, so my question to you would be, so we're working on getting some children's books available to our students. I would imagine for that to be qualified as a family literacy activity that there would need to be a follow-up in ensuring that the books are utilized by the family.
Absolutely, yes. So the parent or family member would need to be using that. The interactiveness of the activity between the parent or family member would need to be able to be measured. Again, this is one of those areas under WIOA that doesn't really qualify for measuring those measurable skill gains. So it's not, unfortunately, it's one of those things that I don't feel is being as highly stressed as a priority in services. As you look at engaging in that, I can see where programs would be dissuaded from spending a lot of time or a lot of resources in building this. Doesn't mean that this cannot be something that you're engaged in or that you're partnering with. It just, you won't see your outcome measures improve by these activities.
Okay, so my next question, still on family literacy. I hope that it's okay that I'm commandeering your time. We're located right next to a public library, and we're trying to work on a partnership and encouraging the use of family story time. If there is a way that we had families check in and check out of family story time, would that be a way to measure the use of that resource?
Cost of the resource would need to be appropriate to the time that they're using it. So your ability to track their hours and put those hours into TE so that you're showing some type of engagement, while a pre and a post test is not going to be something that you're going to show with an outcome for that. You'd still need to show that where you're doing something, that there's some measurable outcome with it. so a program that is proposing to use funds for that might need to look at, well, what are some outcome measures that we can see with family literacy, and make that proposal in their application.
Okay, thank you.
So with the total of 8 opportunities of providing activities, a program has a lot of flexibility, has a lot of opportunities to pick and choose and to identify how they can best serve their population, how they can help remove those barriers to employment. And there's opportunities, again, to be innovative, to look at things that are outside of the box, and how we can partner with other individuals, how we can create and develop these courses that regionally are needed for the economic development, for the needs of the individuals that we serve. So WIOA is a unique opportunity to reframe what could be considered business as usual. No, any activity and must be one of these 8. If it's not one of these 8, then it's not supported by federal funds. If I'm reading your question right. But you don't have to provide all 8 of these activities. Okay, great. So if you were to say, well, our region does not need to do integrated education and training, that's not one of the activities that we're choosing, what documentation or what analysis did you use to reach that decision? Was it something that was in your local plan that drove you to that? Is it something that of the population that you're serving that drove you to that decision that we're not going to offer that activity in our area? I don't know if they make such a wide distinction between the activities and actually a full-blown program. So those activities can be, I mean, based upon need, can be a once or could be just a 3-month period, but it's an activity that meets that requirement. Sandra is providing a scenario in which they partnered to offer a math class for pre-apprenticeships. I assume, would this be considered a workforce preparation or integrated education and training? Would need a little bit more information to consider it for an integrated education and training because of the requirements. So does it also have, I would say a math class is an adult education piece. So that would be meeting one of the components of an integrated education and training. Was there workforce preparation activities as well as training? And if that training was considered through the apprenticeships, was that using relevant industry, occupational tools? And was that math class structured as one set of objectives? Does that help explain that, Sandra? I wouldn't say a math class would be a workforce preparation activity under the definition of workforce preparation. And you were talking a little bit about your past activity. That would be tied to different measurable goals under WIA. Under WIOA, there's no real measurable goals related to family literacy. So in your competitive application, you would have to spell out what measurable goals you were hoping to achieve, that while not WIOA, not meeting measurable skill gains, that you are going to track for the purpose of your family literacy. I'd agree with you, Sandra, that if they were not involved in the training component of it, they were missing out on the integrated education and training. So that math piece that you were offering was just an adult education component. But that's a good scenario to discuss and walk through. So if you wanted to tweak that and change it, so that you were offering an integrated education and training, what would that look like? What would adding those additional components be, and what would that take? Sandy, that's excellent news with your family literacy participants. And those participants are being tracked to measurable outcomes under WIA. And just unfortunate that WIOA didn't include a measurable way for us to track family literacy activities. In the fact that participants for family literacy activities don't need to lack basic skills for their ability to enroll. Again, if a program should decide that they need to meet the requirement of lacking basic skills, and that's a local program decision. Federally, a participant who wants to engage in family literacy activities that's above the eligibility, there's an exception made in WIOA that they can participate in Title II and not lack basic skills as long as it's for and just exclusively with a family literacy activity. Therefore, measuring them using a CASAS pre and post would not contribute to a measurable skill gain for your program or for the state. Okay, we're down to our last couple minutes. If there's any other questions, throw them up on the chat. We're going to stop the recording, and we're going to post this. There's going to be a place on the Department of Education website for the WIOA Wednesday webinars for you to be able to access them as links so that you can listen to these and have access to the PowerPoint slides as well. So I appreciate your time today. I hope that this was beneficial. We'll also send out an evaluation so that we can continue to work towards improving this information that we're providing to the local programs so that you feel like we're giving you as much information as possible on WIOA implementation. Certainly, Anne, IET will be part of the IALCE as it's a required element with that. Hopefully, we continue to touch on that as we go, as I have, as Mike has, because it is such a new player on the block, and we want to make sure that we are able to wrap our arms around it and understand it as best as we can.